How's it going, Andrew?
What's going on, Matt?
Same old. It'd be tomorrow that I'm getting my new bike as of the day this podcast comes out. Well, new to me, not new. So
Heck yeah.
pretty stoked. About time. It's been too long that my garage has been motorcycleless.
Yeah, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah, which is too long.
Way too long.
I haven't had a motorcyclist garage since 2006.
That's almost 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we had a fun week this week. I know that this might be a week late because we record in batches, but we just had fun visiting Aurora Lodge, which is a very unique lodge in Milwaukee County that is a German-speaking lodge that does a modified French rite. We were originally going to go there to watch a fellowcraft degree and ended up getting moved, so we went there and watched some posting and hung out with those guys. Always a great time. They have such good hospitality there. It was fun.
Always a good time to visit those guys, and it's amazing how much the ritual comes through, even when it's in a different language, and you can still pretty much follow what's going on.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, honestly, even though it's archaic German, so many German words are like so similar to English that if you just listen closely, I feel like I understood a decent amount of what was said. I'd say probably 20 to 30% I kind of got. And I was like, yeah. So yeah, it's always fun. And it's cool that we have a surviving German-speaking lodge. We're one of the few states that has one that's still around.
Right. Yep. No, it's cool that we have that, and I love going to see those guys. I wish I get there more often, and look forward to trying to get there more often in the future.
Yeah, and to any of our Wisconsin, Milwaukee area listeners, if you haven't visited Aurora yet, make sure to make some time to pay those guys a visit. It's fun visiting them. They're a good hang. They're fun brothers, and you get to see something unique. But we do have I don't want to jabberjaw too long because we do have a very, very special guest coming on. So do you mind if I hit the music?
Go for it. Let's get to it.
Loosen up your ties and roll up your sleeves. It's time for fellowship with Matt and Andrew. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin or any other Grand Lodge or any appended body.
All right, and we're back with our very special guest. Joining us right now, we have past master, worshipful brother, Raymond Foster, who is a member of San Dimas Masonic Lodge number 428 and a member also of Mariposa Lodge number 24, and he is a author of a couple of books, but his most recent book that has just came out, barely a month out, is called The Temple Within. Thank you, brother, for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
So for our listeners, brother, just tell us a little bit about yourself. We're out here in Wisconsin, and you're on the West Coast. I should have mentioned he's out in California. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you into Freemasonry.
So, well, when I was 14 or 15 years old, I met a man who actually introduced me first to Aristotle and then to Plato and Socrates, and he would be my future father-in-law, and he was a Freemason. And at that time, I spent decades thinking that Freemasons were men who contemplated the great issues in life and were familiar with all the great philosophers, and that's what they did, and I waited and waited and waited. He passed away very early in my life, and so I waited to somebody asked me to become a Mason. And my father got sick about 20 years ago, and I moved in with him up north in Mariposa. Mariposa is near Yosemite, and I live in Southern California, so it's about 300 miles away. And my aunt was the worthy matron of the Eastern Star. My uncle was a Hiram Award-winning Mason, and my cousins were Masons up there. And one day my aunt says to me, "Have you ever thought about becoming a Mason?" I said, "Well, I've thought about nothing else but that." She goes, "Well, the boys can't ask you, but I can. Do you want to be a Mason?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." And I was raised in Mariposa number 24, and my father eventually would pass away, and I affiliated with San Dimas 428. I didn't take a traditional path through the officers line. I just showed up every Monday night for rehearsal, stated meetings, every degree. I learned the degree work, and I filled in, and then one day the guy who was supposed to be the junior warden couldn't go forward, and I put my hand up, and that's where I got inserted into the process. And so My idea was I wanted to learn the ritual. And we'll talk, I hope, about why I felt that was important and what my purpose was. And hopefully you'll ask me too why I really don't like being called worshipful brother. My name is Raymond. I'm Brother Raymond. That's good enough. I think you leave worshipful in the East when you depart. That's a title, and I left it there. So that's me in Freemasonry. I'm the chair of the George Washington chapter of DMLA Advisory Board. I am a honorary Legion of Honor recipient from DMLA. I was the Grand Master's Mason of the Year in California in 2000 for the Masonic education that I was giving throughout the state. I'm a Hawaiian Hiram Award winner in California, a recipient in California, and I'm the current officer's coach in 428.
Awesome.
And in case anybody wants to know, I go to lodge almost every month in Mariposa, and it is indeed a 700-mile round trip.
Oh, my God.
Wow. That's some dedication right there. Right on. I love it. I love it.
So before we hop into talking a little bit about your book, which I'm keen on doing, how long have you been a Mason?
A little over 19 years.
So you joined 19 years ago. What kept you in Freemasonry once you joined? What kept you here with us?
Well, for me, Freemasonry was always, I wanted to pursue what we call the esoteric part of Freemasonry for the first 45 years of my life. And so once I got the opportunity to, I think that search kept me in. And of course, the first 10 years was learning the ritual and the journey toward the East and the zigzag direction that I got. And then in the introduction of the book, I talk about, I started to really give Masonic education and how that education just failed miserably. The men would clap politely. I get golf claps, but I'm like, that was no good. And, I was a policeman for 25 years and I retired from that 22 years ago. And I went to teach at university when my first textbook came out. So I've been a writer for a long time and an educator. And so I then redoubled my efforts, approached it from a different direction, and began to have, for me, I always say this, I'm going to get more out of this podcast than you ever will. I got more out of writing than anyone will ever get out of reading the book. I am on my own journey, and part of that journey is thinking things through as I speak and as I write. So that's what's kept me engaged in Freemasonry, is the exploration of the temple within.
I like that you said that because I'm also a spoken thinker. I'm in a similar boat. That one thing that I like about being on a podcast is I swear that half my good thoughts came in conversation, not in contemplation. It's in the discourse and in the brotherhood and the fellowship that I discover what my thoughts are on things. It's like my brain has been working it behind the scenes and it comes out my mouth and I go, that's a good, I like that. That's kind of what I think about too.
Well, you actually, that was, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say we definitely have our very much so stream of consciousness moments on this podcast. And I would say that's where a lot of personal growth has happened for both Andrew and I. So I can appreciate your sentiment on that for sure.
The first section, the book is in 3 sections, but the first essay in the 3rd section is called Ask, Seek, and Knock, because the first lesson you were taught in Freemasonry before you applied, this is the lesson we're taught on the way in, is that we don't think first, we speak first. That's the way we are engineered. We speak, we ask, we seek, we think, and we knock, we act. And so asking, speaking, thinking, and acting, that's the way we program our subconscious to see the things that our conscious mind is too busy to see. You probably know somebody who is always in a bad relationship. No matter where they turn, they find the bad relationship. And the person who, no matter where they go, they find the great thing in life. That's because their subconscious is trained to look for whatever they want. And so we retrain our subconscious through the process. And we taught this as Masons. This is one of the deep esoteric lessons, one of the most powerful. And think about all 3 rituals. In the rituals and the journey the man takes, this one lesson is over and over again is emphasized in the way we program our subconscious. So you're absolutely right. I think talking and seeing what comes out is a really good way to explore stuff.
So before I catch myself, because I'm tempted to go down that rabbit hole with you, before we go down the rabbit hole, I would like could you please introduce your book, The Temple Within, and let us know what was the original spark that inspired you to write this book? Because I feel like we're going to go down a bunch of rabbit holes on this, so we should at least let the listeners know what we're talking about before we jump down those rabbit holes.
That's a good call.
So, and it's in the introduction. When I started doing Masonic education, I began to, so it's my belief that the only way we're going to improve masonry as a craft is by the use of our three pillars: wisdom, strength, and beauty. And wisdom is Masonic education, and Masonic education in Observant Lodge is not only stated meetings, but at every degree there's some Masonic education at the end of the degree where we talk about it. Every Masonic function has educational parts. Even dinner, there's something about it that's educational. So as I began to decide, I began to speak all around California at different lodges. I began to develop lesson plans. And so those lesson plans, so that I could speak intelligently. And then a lodge here, Arcadia number 276, asked me to do a year-long kind of a graduate seminar with their men on all three degrees, just to go through them from soup to nuts. And that caused me again to really sit down and outline things. From there, I have a blog, and I started going, well, I've got outlines. I might as well write essays. So I wrote essays, and I'm starting to look at it. I'm going, wow, there's a book here. And so I began to collect up everything you read in that book was a Masonic education piece. And so then what I did was I organized it, and I went back and I began to research it. And so that's where the book came from. It was done last January, and then I let it sit. I let it sit for 6 months because I had another book that needed to get out right away. It was pushing out of me. And so I let this one sit, and the other one came out, and then that one actually comes out next week. This one came out first just because of the editing process. But so that's the book itself. It really is Masonic education that became outlines, that became essays, then it was organized in sort of a book.
So it started as a variety of educations that got turned into an anthology of all your educations. Then you connected it all together to put out your entire piece on the building of the temple within. The title itself is powerful, and I love the allegory of masonry being building one's temple within themselves. I love playing with that idea, not only within our philosophy, but even in the fact that we memorize our ritual. Is as if you are storing and building an internal temple with not only the accoutrements, but also the ritual work that goes on within that temple is stored within yourself. What do you think what was one of the lessons that you think is most powerful that you can take from your education pieces that you've stored in your book?
I think each one of them speaks to it a different, well, okay, I'm going to give you a little secret about writing. The writer only brings about 15% of the experience to the table. The reader brings the other 85%. It's your imagination and your context and background that's important. And one of the comments I get about this book is like, while other Masonic books are written like they're just telling me what it is, you're asking me what it is. And so this is set up so that you 3 or 4 of you could get together, or a lodge could get together, read an essay, and then there's 3 questions that will help you reflect back on the essay, because I think masonry is a journey, and it's a journey within. And so that's the first big lesson, is that I think it's reflective in nature, and that you've got to find your own path. A man who knows the lost words will not tell you them because he will be unable to. When you know the secrets, you're unable to articulate the secret, and that's difficult to explain, but I think that's where you're headed, to a place where you get it, and I can help you get there, but I can't tell you what it is.
It's the old finger pointing at the moon type of allegory going on there, right? Yeah, I can point, but yeah. I can't tell you what the experience is going to be like. It's an experiential art. And I agree with that. I think it is an experiential art, and I think our lessons are a framework for experience.
Well, the ritual itself, and this is in the book too, I go into 2 important things about the ritual itself, why every man should participate. There are 2 powerful ways we know Freemasonry is through what's called participatory knowing, and it is knowing by participating. You do this in church. If you go to church and you sing, you stand, you kneel, you sit, you're participating in the worship service. You're getting a religious experience out of it through participation. So by being in the room, even if you are not a character in one of these plays, you are participating. And so you have participatory knowing. The second is perspectival knowing, which is more powerful. And, I challenge you, next time there's a degree, the next 3 degrees, sit in 3 distinct different places in the lodge and watch the degree. It will look different from those different places. And that's an exercise in perspectival knowing. And so the lodge gives us those two things. That's why you can't, we could tell all this stuff and put it out on the internet and people could read it. You're not going to get it until you experience it.
Well, we've always said you can read a book about the taste of chocolate and you can read it in great detail. You can listen to poets explain the taste of chocolate in great detail. But until you taste a piece of chocolate, it's not going to quite click. It's not going to quite you're not going to see the full picture until you see the full picture and you get the full experience. And so, in Masonry, when we're like, hey, when we have new people joining lodge, we're like, don't read ahead because the spoilers just take away from the experience, because it's better received when you're receiving your first taste of chocolate without reading about chocolate and then wondering, like, is this what it's supposed to taste like? I was expecting it to taste like this. It's like, just enjoy the experience of tasting chocolate for the first time. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. In one of the first essays on secrecy, why we think it's secret, I talk about that specifically, is that we want to keep the knowledge given out by degrees so that it's built upon the other to enhance the experience of the initiate. You're absolutely right. So, and because you meet guys all the time that they've read ahead or they've looked it up on the internet, and I'm like, well, okay, but it's not going to be what you think.
That's exactly true. I agree with the whole experience thing. And I do want to circle back to something you had mentioned about the different perspectives throughout the room, depending on where you're sitting. And that's something I've always stressed to officers as they progress through the chairs, because I picked up on that myself, and I'm sure, Andrew, you have as well, as we've progressed through the chairs, is each different chair you sit in as an officer, you get new responsibilities and maybe more authority and stuff like that, but the room completely changes. The feel of it, the look of it, everything about that room is different depending where you're sitting. And it's not just because of your station at that point. It's just physically, it just feels different, and it's kind of crazy how much of a difference that can make.
When I was master of the lodge, one of the things I did was I would say, Brother Senior Deacon, escort Brother such and such to the east and have him come sit for stated meeting in the east with me, particularly if it was somebody I thought that had the ability. I just want to talk about the chairs, because this is one of the three pillars. One of them is strength, and the strength of I'll tell you, a strong Masonic lodge is a Masonic lodge that finds pathways for participation for everyone, not just through the officers' chairs. The officers' chairs may be the weakest path of participation because it's really a dead end. You become master, and then what? You're past master. And if you become when you become past masters, you have three options, and this is the only three things that will happen. Number one is you reinvent yourself and become something else. You become the treasurer, the officer coach, the dishwasher. It doesn't matter. You find another job. Number two is you never go back to lodge again. A lot of past masters just drift away. Number three is you become a troublemaker.
Yeah.
And that's it, right?
Yep.
So the officers' chairs, finding pathways for participation for all of our men is our strength. That's what we ought to be focused on.
Well, when you think about it, we always talk about how you don't want there to be idle craftsmen. And too many officer lines, and where our lodge is as guilty of it as any other ones, get so focused on the work of the lodge and the relying on the officers only that you forget that there are people who, given the opportunity, can be really good and industrious craftsmen. And, I've always tried to find new and inventive ways, whether that's a committee or anything, to be like, hey, one less job for an officer to do is they got plenty on their plates. We should spread the love because people want to get involved. And they have a lot to offer to their lodge. And so I'm currently sitting senior warden at my lodge, and I, looking at our calendar, tried to clear a couple of our events off to make breathing room for new ideas and events for our younger and non-officer brothers, or even young officers, to have space that they could grow their own passions within. Because if it's too full, then you're leaving no room for the brothers to, have room to breathe and to really feel an investment in their lodge.
I agree. Pathways for participation.
I agree wholeheartedly on that. You have to find a way to get guys off the sidelines and get involved without necessarily taking an officer role. And I had to chuckle to myself when you said you find a way to reinvent yourself. I just got out of the East. I was worshipful master at our lodge in 2024, so I shouldn't say just got out of the East, but fairly recently, and I was elected a trustee, and I just realized that that's exactly what I did with myself this year. Is I reinvented myself as a trustee.
Well, and you reinvented yourself back into the officers line. So
yeah, that
too. Yeah, that's it. It's interesting because I think the more investment you get from the brethren who are on the sidelines, the more that they feel that they're not just like you were saying, when you're in church, you're a participant and you're just like, I'm here, I go through the service. When you get them to actually take a firsthand experience, like, I want you to take a part in ritual, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, it becomes less of a observed experience and more of a lived experience. And I think that's hugely transformative to start that process, especially early on.
I would agree. Keeping men involved in the lodge is important, and that's the strength of a lodge is finding pathways for participation, finding ways to get guys involved.
And speaking
doesn't matter, by the way, how old they are.
It doesn't matter how long they've been on the line. I mean, so we have some old past masters they have never missed meetings. They have been here for the last 30, 40 years. We call them the two old Muppets heckling from the sidelines. And so we had a degree that I was covering for the master who was on vacation, and I needed to fill a spot. And I went, I could grab so-and-so or so-and-so. And I said, but what about these two guys? And I said, hey, I know it's been probably 35 years since you sat a chair. Would you like to be my senior warden for this meeting? And his eyes lit up. He's like, really? And I went, I would love that. And his ritual was a little bit rough around the edges, but it was still super enjoyable to have him in that spot doing something that he hadn't done in such a long time, and to see him in that spot, a chair that I've seen pictures when he was master, a young Tom Dehoney sitting up there, and I can almost see the young man standing right there in the same seat that he was in 30 years ago. And so not only with past masters, but with anybody who's been on the sidelines, whether young or a longtime member, it's fun if they haven't been taking on responsibility in a while to see them re-engage with the lodge in that way.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. I do. I listened to your lad podcast, and you guys asked a couple of interesting questions. Was that one where you talked about what if a man from 150 years ago came into the lodge, and what if that generation before? And I will tell you, if somebody from 150 years ago came to the present day, the first thing they would notice would be the amount of noise that we have today as opposed to 150 years ago. And if we went back, the first thing we'd notice is the lack of noise and the amount of smells that they had that we don't have today. So that would assault, your nose would be assaulted if you were in town, before there were public sewers. But I think that you talked about education in that thing specifically, and I got to tell you that again, wisdom. I think wisdom is education. Wisdom is gained through the education process, and that should be a cornerstone of what we do. But I think why we're failing, why men aren't coming back, and why men aren't coming to lodge, and why men aren't joining lodge, is because we failed to give them the mystical experience that we promised them. And I think we can only do that through education, and that is to educate ourselves to understand the transformative lessons that we're showing someone in what we're doing. I mean, if you really know what the three immovable jewels are, and you can layer down 3 or 4 different lessons that come out of those, and you give that part of the lecture, even though you're not going to say that, you're going to have that meaning behind your voice. You're going to have that meaning in what you talk about. I remember when I went through the middle chamber lecture as the initiate, the man who gave it to me was named Dick Bond. He's since passed away, but he was a World War II fighter pilot. And Dick was talking to me. I didn't know he'd memorized that. I thought he was this guy that knew all this stuff and was explaining it to me. And I thought, wow, this guy I really want to get to know. And that's because he had, and the word is inculcate, he had inculcated this Masonic knowledge in himself. And I think that we are failing to inculcate ourselves and then provide that mystical experience for the men coming behind us. And that's part of what I'm trying to capture with this book, is to give you a little bit, to give you an edge.
Well, and so I would, yep, go for it.
Thank you. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And to your point, seeing someone who can do a lecture, like they're just speaking to you and you don't even realize it's something is memorized. It's a beautiful thing to watch. Having seen all the lectures repeatedly, I even love seeing that from the sidelines. It's just amazing. But when I read the certain parts of your book I've been able to read so far, I was, and you've kind of alluded to it a couple of times, I was thinking the same thing. This would be valuable to use in Lodge to start bringing more of these topics to the men in that lodge.
Let me give you just a taste, because the ashlar, the rough ashlar, that seems like a simple lesson, right? Here's the rough stone, and here's the finished stone. We give a guy that, we tell him, yeah, here's where you're supposed to start, and here's where you're going to finish. Oh, wait a minute, let's shave a little bit off of that. They are the three immovable jewels. They're put together with another object, and that object is a trestle board. So the lesson that's gathered together there is, you're not going anywhere without a plan, buddy. You're not going to go from the rough shape to the perfect shape, right, without a plan. So that's another, now we've shaved off one level. Now that's a little more meaningful when we look at that group. Let's shave another thing off. Think about the West Gate, right? And think about the men coming into the lodge. You know, if you're down in the quarry and you're an operative mason, you don't pick a stone that's too small to work. You know, if you know what's more or less what size you need, the rough one you're going to get is a rough one that you can shape into the perfect one. So when we have men come to the lodge, we want men that, and this is the thing, if you send me out to investigate somebody, I'm going to ask myself a question. Do I believe they have a capacity at this point in their life to begin a process of self-improvement that's going to be meaningful for themselves? You know, not just that they're not convicted of a felon, that they got so much money they believe in a supreme being. That's, yeah, okay, they're made of stone, but do they culturally fit my lodge? You know, I will give this 15-minute talk to people at our lodge. We have Thursday nights are open, and so every once in a while when people come, I will take them upstairs. And so I had these two men there, and they were interested in being Masons. And one of them was a sheriff's commander. And the last thing I said to the guy was, hey, by the way, the last thing I'm going to tell you is we're one of a dozen lodges within 10 miles. I really suggest that you go around and talk to the men of those different lodges and find one that you make sure culturally fits you, right? Because they're all a little bit different. And so I just encourage you to, before you come back to us, that you do that. So I then got a call from another man who said, yeah, why did you tell that guy you didn't want him in the lodge? And I said, well, no, that's not what I said. What I said was I encourage you to go look and to find one that fits you. And if we're the one that fits you, come back. And then I said to him, but I'm sure glad he took it that way because I don't want him in my lodge. I mean, that's the cultural thing of, do they fit into where we are? Do they fit into what we're going? So now we've shaved you can do this again and again. The lessons that are just there in those objects, right?
Well, and we do I've always done a similar thing, and I've seen it in our lodge too, where we say, hey, just so you know, like, we're not only interviewing you, you're interviewing us. Like, if you don't like anyone in this room, this is going to suck. I said, so you should really, like, especially like in Milwaukee, we have 12, 13 lodges all within 15, 20 minutes. I was like, I would encourage 15 to travel around and meet with people. And I said, we would love to have you in our lodge as well, but just make sure that, when you make this choice, if you're going to have the most impactful experience, it's going to be in a lodge that you feel like you can grow in, that you can actually flourish in. And so we say the same thing, and I've found that, I don't know if that's just because it feels like you're playing hard to get, but they oftentimes do come back and say, I visited, I'd like to stay in your lodge. But if they don't, we had a couple of guys who were like, well, I met these guys at this lodge, and I said, hey, no hard feelings. I'd rather have you happy in the craft in a place where you can truly be transformed than stuck with some people that you don't get along with. And I think that's an important point, because it's not just us making the decision. You're making the decision too. And if your heart's not in it, you're not going to actually receive the benefits that the craft has to offer.
Yes. And I think we ought to be real clear.
Yeah. And that goes to the point, there shouldn't be a competition to try to get a guy to stay at your lodge if you don't feel like he's the right fit, right? Get him to another lodge. If the craft grows, every lodge succeeds. A rising tide raises all ships. So ultimately, you're benefiting the craft by gaining a member that will continue to stick around, rather than one that might come to your lodge because he never went and looked anywhere else. And then after he gets his entered apprentice, go, I'm not really a good fit here. I don't get along with these guys, and bail. And then the fraternity lost a potentially great member.
In large urban areas, it is a problem in that somebody becomes a Freemason because a guy they met at work, and yet they commute 30 miles, and they may commute each 30 miles in opposite directions. So he drags a guy to the lodge who's from a lodge who lives 60 miles away and has got to drive by 14 lodges to get to this one. Well, when you're new, that sounds great, but over the long run, my lodge is 3/4 of a mile from my house. I mean, if I forget something, I can go home and get it real quick. And Mariposa is a long way. I go up there because those men accepted me originally, and I would not be a Mason not for them. And so, plus there's something about mountain masonry. That's what we call it, because it's way up on the mountain there. A little bit different than urban masonry,
Right. Awesome.
So Matt and I have this juxtaposition, and so I'm going to have a challenging question. So I'm more of an esoteric Mason. Matt is not unesoteric, but he's more of a practical esoteric Mason. So we try to temper ourselves between me being too heady and talking about philosophy or whatever I want to get into, and him saying, why does it matter? You know what I mean? Let's bring it down to the piece where anybody could take a hold of this nugget and say, this is useful to me here, now, immediately. What would you say is a lesson that you've discovered within Masonry that is helpful at the smallest level to anyone listening, Mason or non-Mason?
Well, I think all of them, but okay, so let's take the 24-inch gauge, because that seems like pretty simple, right? It's it's divided into 24 equal parts. Now, I always ask myself though, what do they do in Europe where it's in meters, man? So we have the 24-inch gauge. So we have the 24-inch gauge. It's the 24 hours a day, which we divide it into service, God, our usual vocations, and refreshment and repose. So that seems pretty simple, right? That's pretty practical. But wait a minute, let's just stop for just a moment the words that are used, right? First off, what is a service to God? And we're told that, by the way, at least the California lecture, the first degree, is that we're here to help our fellow creature, who is we're all children of the same divine parent, right? And so anything that you do that helps your fellow man, your fellow lodge brother, your community, that's service to God. And that ought to be a component of everybody's day. That's not going to church. That's being of service to the Creator by taking care of His creation. And so I think that that's a demanding thing that the 24-inch gauge asks. The second thing is it's your usual vocation. It doesn't say your job. And I think what a Mason ought to do is look for their vocation, to find the thing they're passionate about, and that's the thing they make money with, is whatever their vocation is. And then refreshment and repose. It's important to realize that you can't be I call it the lifeguard rule. I was a lifeguard when I was like 14 or 15 years old, and the first thing they taught me freaked me out. I don't know if you know what the first life rule of a lifeguard is that if there's somebody's in the pool drowning, what your primary responsibility is? It's to save yourself. Because if you jump in and there's 2 drowning people, then you've just added to the problem. And so the idea that, refreshment, repose, I've got to take care of me so that I am in a position to be able to take care of you. And so I think that's another important lesson. So that's your practical side, right? And we've looked at your practical side, but we've taken your more esoteric side and began to explore the words themselves and drilled down into the concept. And I think if you do it that way, which is how I designed this book, it serves both purposes. It gives you meat, and at the same time gives the esoteric guy these other paths to follow that are, I think that's how I see it. I hope I answered your question now.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was a great way of putting it. I like that a lot.
So within your book, you talk about building the inner temple, and I think that that's a good encapsulating term for what the goal is or one of the many goals of a Mason, if not probably the most important one, but there's a lot of things we do as Masons. What recommendations would you give a brother who is trying to find a way to spiritually build their inner temple? Where do they start, and what path should they follow in that progress towards trying to build their master's work or their beautiful work or their temple?
Well, I guess I want to stay a little bit with the previous question, because I also think it's important to, this is what may answer your question, is to tease a little bit too, right? The configuration of the lodge represents King Solomon's temple. King Solomon's temple is pretty much standard Christian dogma for the human condition, right? And that's what we're talking about. And so by extension, The lodge room it's a representation of the human condition and the journey we take inside of it. But if you look at it, it's also a representation of one solar day and one solar year. There is a zodiac calendar within the temple, right? And I'll give you, and guess where, if you took the zodiac calendar and you overlay it over a Masonic lodge, Mercury would be where the senior deacon is. The senior deacon does what? Carries messages throughout the lodge, right?
Mercurial.
And so you see there is, so there's another layer that you can tease as you talked about the practical. And so I think that's important too, is that you give the basic tools to the men. You talk about what a gavel is, what a level is, what a plumb is, why these are good and useful lessons for you. And then you also tease a little bit, and some men are going to explore further down. And, the old rituals, there's part of our Fellowcraft lecture that alludes to a ritual we don't do any longer. And it talks about what the pillars are constructed out of. And that lecture is about the whole Noah's Ark thing that we don't even do anymore. They used to do a long time ago, but vestiges of these ancient things exist within it, and it's fun to explore. So I think that's important too. It's important to satisfy both of those cravings, both the practical and as well as I would call maybe the more scholarly, or even the more, and esoteric's not the right word, really. That's almost a cult, right? Almost an occult look at it. That's okay to do.
You could say philosophical or theoretical, right? Like there is if you're studying any good philosophy that deals with virtue ethics, you can read about it all day. And you can sit in your armchair and say, I can recite to you so much Plato and so much Aristotle and all that stuff. And it goes, but have you done it? And you know what I mean? So it's the ability to awaken the consciousness, understanding that there is value in an idea. And then it becomes the human's job to take the idea and manifest it in action. And an idea sitting on the shelf is just an idea sitting on the shelf. And so a lot that we talk about on this podcast, Matt and I, is trying to pull it off of the shelf and make it into something that's actionable. Kind of like you were talking about the knocking on the door. Where does it start and how does it become how does it come into motion and actually affect the world around it? And what I always found interesting within the Masonic allegories and lessons is, in a very craftsman-like way, a lot of our stuff is distilled from so many different traditions within Christianity, within Stoicism, within various classical sources, Hermeticism. You can smell it all kind of on there. And it's almost like the ancient craft writers of a ritual are like, let's distill all of this down, which can get very complicated, and let's bring it into some actually very useful and easily applied from a builder, someone who's trying to build themselves up, but still allow the creativity for when you have a good foundation that you can explore other things as well. But it gives you like a very nice little package that you can start to work with like immediately.
As a scholar, I approach masonry like this. The actual stone masons, the history of people who work in stone is a deep, deep history that can be traced linearly all the way back to the Collegia in Rome and back to the Phoenicians and all the way back to King Solomon's temple and before. It can be traced that way. The stoneworkers have that. But I'm going to tell you, the stoneworkers didn't have any special philosophy. That's not, they never had that. What has happened is that the philosophy are all the various vines that have wrapped themselves around the trunk of masonry, the strong tree that's grown out of the ground with the deep, deep roots in history. So the stone in these philosophy is the vines that have wrapped themselves and now are part of the tree and are indistinguishable from the tree itself. And so if you start picking at the vines and you follow the four cardinal virtues and you go, oh, this dude Plato had the same virtues. He had them in a different order, but he had the same ones. And well, where did he get them? And you could follow them all the way around. So you're absolutely right. These things can be followed deeply and deeply. And I believe you learn more and more and more. But I also want to say, you asked a question about what can a man do the most he can do to expect himself for self-improvement or spiritual improvement. And that's participation, in so much as we now know scientifically that our environment activates us at a genetic level, right? And by participating with certain human beings and being with certain human beings, we're flipped on. Different genes are flipped on. Different hormones are released into our body. We become different people when we're with our families, when we're in our lodge. And so by participating in the lodge, you are genetically become a different man by flipping on different genes and having different hormones and flesh in your body. And then you have to have the realization that, tomorrow morning when we wake up, we all three will have a different stomach lining. Every 24 hours, all those cells are replaced. And every 7 years, almost every cell in the body, except for one gland, is replaced. We are different human beings. We're constantly changing. And our job is to manage that change. And one of the ways we can manage that is participation with our lodge brothers in this fraternity that will help us to grow.
The old
So go to lodge, damn it.
The old Theseus's ship argument. How long until the ship is not the same ship because it's Theseus's? So I did an education once in lodge talking about the importance of the opening and closing of the lodge. And one of the points that I brought up was about how it synchronizes everyone at the same time in the same moment watching the same thing. And it not only has a transformative, but a bonding experience it works through time. So the longer you do it, you're connected not only to the past, but to future Masons who aren't even alive yet, and that you're all sharing in this moment. And it's that same type of thing that you're talking about, is that by going to lodge, you're reintegrating with it. And if you look at the ritual of the opening and closing, it is filtered down reminders of everything you were taught through minor symbols being like, yep, you're going to see the do-guards and signs. You're going to see this, you're going to see that, you're going to see the other thing. And those are all reminders to everything that you were taught, compacted into a very small ritual to open and close, to reintegrate you at least monthly, to say, why am I here? What do Masons do? Who are we? And to continuously reinforce that over and over and over and over as a way to kind of re-plug in. And then you're at the end, you're given what was it that Worshipful Brother Pat Cholka said? You're given a benediction. Now take it out into the world and bring it to the world, now that you've been leaving these sacred halls and you must go off and be a man again and you have to go to your work and stuff. It's like, don't just leave it here. Take it into the world with you and be a Mason.
The most important 12 words in a Masonic ceremony is at the end of every 3 degrees. And it's the most important. It's the mission statement, and it's the practical how to do it. And that is practice out of the lodge those great moral duties inculcated in it. And as a matter of fact, if you look, and this is another one of those, let's layer that down, right? The word inculcate. Now you can look that up, and that's a really good word to explore. But if you look at the 135 different versions of the Bible, you'll find only one that has the word inculcate in. And you look at that's from the section in Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, in that one section there, and I think it's Deuteronomy 6, the commandment for Moses is to inculcate the word of God into your life. And he talks about by doing it by thinking, by saying it. And he talks about it by tying it to your hands. He talks about it by walking. And he talks about it by putting it in your heart. He gives you 4 ways. Did you just hear the 4 ways that it was into you were going to inculcate, right? And so, and you look at that and you go, okay, maybe that was intentional when they did that, or maybe that's just the universe. Maybe it's my interpretation. But that's such a powerful lesson on how we inculcate and we practice out of the lodge's great moral duties inculcated, and why that's our mission. That's our mission. You're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. And by the way, that leads into something else. One of the things when you write a book, you keep a file. This book is 455 pages. I think it's a little over 100,000 words. So I got an email from somebody that apparently the word precision is misspelled somewhere in it. So you keep a file on these things because you might want to do a revision, but you also keep a file because there may be a second companion to it. And so one of the things these conversations have brought out is I keep notes like, wow, that whole thing, I didn't do the 12 words in this book, I don't think. And that would be such a powerful little essay to write because I've given that lesson before. So again, that's your whole thing. In the beginning, we talked about how through conversation, ideas come out and then I write them down, taking action. And now that puts it in my subconscious, training me to perhaps produce another work. You do know, though, the Ask, Seek, Knock, has anybody ever told you if you're going to do goals, you got to write them down?
As an ADHD person, I have to, because or else I forget that I wanted to do them.
That's one of the first things they'll tell you. If you're going to have a goal, the first thing you need to do is write it down. Why is that? Well, I talked about it, I thought about it, and I took the action of writing down. You have a simple step of completing the circuit on Ask, Seek, and Knock. And in the essay, I talk about whether or not those are dependent or independent clauses, because that makes a difference, right? If they're grouped together or they're independent of each other. I hope to think they're grouped.
Well, you make the first physical creation of it too. For the first step, you put something from your mind into a physical space, not even just a word that is lightly physical or mercurial, etc. You actually put it onto a solid space that you created the first step of your creation process of your goal. And so like there is something powerful about writing it down and writing it down often, especially if you're trying to maintain your goal. If you say, every morning I'm going to do ABC 1, 2, 3. If you sit down at your desk and you write down your goal and then you start your day, you started with an anchoring, a reintegration and a re-anchoring of the idea. And I feel like that's like a good psychological starting point to like build off of, and then hopefully you actually do it. You know what I mean?
I think that what I believe in the Ask, Seek, Knock paradigm, the paradigm of programming, is that, you have people who they'll do the whole secret and you're going to manifest in the universe. And that's, I think, a bunch of hooey, because I think you can actually explain it. By the way, I also allude to alchemy in this book a lot. I'll go into the alchemy of symbols and I'll talk about those. I'll as teasers kind of to show you where they are. And this is kind of alchemy too with Ask, Seek, Knock. But there's two things that by memorizing the ritual, if you've ever been giving a lecture and suddenly you have the experience of being outside yourself, you're giving the ritual, and every master will tell you this just for a moment. It's like I am standing outside of myself and I can see myself. I'm literally having another thought while I'm speaking because it's so inculcated in me that it's flowing out of me. That's a transcendental experience. You have induced a transcendental experience by memorizing the ritual and then performing it. And so that's one proof that you can do that. But the second thing is we all drive cars, right? If you're driving a car, everybody has driven a long distance or even a short distance and not remembered how they got there because you're just subconsciously driving and you're just programmed. Our physical brains, our minds, the conscious part of us is so busy right now just trying to make sense out of all the stuff in the world with the sounds and the light and everything going on. It doesn't have time to be on the lookout for what's good. The subconscious, on the other hand, gets the same view, but the only thing it's interested in is what you tell it to be interested in, what you've programmed it to be. And so it's looking, and it's your intuition, right? It's the thing that nudges you to do something, and then go, wow, that was really fortuitous that I did that, or was serendipitous. No, you've programmed your subconscious. It saw an opportunity, and you grasped it because you listened to your own subconscious. That's the power of the Ask, Seek, Knock. That's the power of talking, thinking it through, taking an action, and then going back through the cycle again and talking and doing that over and over again. And I make one guarantee. If you pick something tonight, anybody listening to this, and you do that 3 times, some magic will happen within 24 hours. If you do that, it's that powerful. You only have to do it 3 times. For whatever you want to focus on, job promotion, better relationship, doesn't matter. If you think about it, if you say something about it, you think about what you said, you take some small action, you do that 3 times, within 24 hours, your subconscious will see something and will tell you, oh, do this instead. You'll create some of your own magic. Because it's all around you, all around us all the time. That's a guarantee.
That's a Raymond Foster guarantee.
I like that. Well, Andrew, what are you thinking? You want to ask the question?
Well, hold on. I one thing I'd add too is that with the 3, the first time you do something, it's an anomaly. The second time, it's a coincidence. The third time, it's no longer a coincidence. It's intentional, right? So the first time, we do lots of things the first time. You stub your toe. Stub it 3 times and you go, second time might have been a coincidence. Third time we know you did it on purpose. Like, you know what I mean? And so there's something powerful in doing something in 3s. And we talk about in symbolism, the power of 3 in Masonry quite a bit, a sacred number, the triangle. We love triangles. Boy, do we love a good triangle, a great shape, one of the sturdiest of shapes. And there's something about doing things in 3s, and Masons are obsessed with doing things in 3s. We repeat ourselves 3 times in many sentences too, in 3 different ways of saying it to create that like momentum. Okay. And so another thing that I'm interested in before we go down that rabbit hole or we get trapped in it, with this book, what were your hopes if everybody read this right now in Masonry, what type of impact do you think it would have?
Well, I wasn't This book is for the non-Mason, really, I think. If it were Masons, I think if you just read it and you asked a question, you formed a question in your mind, and that's what I want. I just want guys to ask questions. I think that if we took the wisdom, strength, and beauty model and we started to look at Masonic education and we became observant lodges in that way, we did Masonic education, we found ways to, and then beauty, by the way, is displaying the beauties of Masonry into our communities, but through our charitable work and through our work on the ground and through our lives. And if you did that, I think Masonry would grow, and I think our democracy would survive. And that's, I guess, if I wanted to go somewhere, that'd be it. Cool. You want to talk about what's your big question? Number 3, where that comes from? That's an easy one. You guys got easy. That's an easy question.
I know where 3 comes. I like talking about 3. I mean, the thing is so I recommended a book to Matt that in the Fellowcraft degree, we say, if you want to learn about Masonry, learn about geometry. And they go, what? And they go, I just told you the secret. If you want to unlock some more layers in Masonry, learn about geometry. And people are like, nah. And you're like, no, hold on. Let me repeat it. Masonry and geometry were originally the same thing. If you want to learn about Masonry, learn about geometry. And then people don't do it. And so there's this book that I enjoy that I can see sitting on the shelf that is like from number 1 through 10, and it talks about how like God created the universe, or like I can look at it, but no point at it. But so it basically goes through each number and goes, what's the mathematical value? What was its symbolic value through time? What did it mean? And it asks you to buy a compass, and it asks you to buy a pencil and a ruler. And they go, and you're going to go through activities with me. You're going to geometrize with me along the way. And that book was one of the first ones where I started going, so much of the symbolism, the layouts of the lodge, how everything is done, it's like wine that has been sat long enough, and it starts to blossom. And you go, it's all here. They just told us straight up to learn about geometry, and it will make sense, especially if you look at Euclidean or the Western philosophy on geometry. If you're reading Vitruvius or anything like that, you go, it's right here. We just told you to do it. And so Matt has got that book on his shelf now, I've seen. And
that's somewhere over there.
Yeah. And so like the number 3, the 3, 5, and 7, like it all starts to unlock, like you're talking about, the layers. It goes, the first layer is just you took the ritual at face value and you went, this is what it says. And then you got to start taking one layer off at a time to figure out what the secrets are, the mysteries are kind of hidden underneath the structure that they've built for us.
Let's unpack a little bit. 3, 5, 7 is important. There's lots of lessons there that are practical. I think the number 3 comes up so much for a few reasons. The first is it's the first number that you can recognize a pattern with. A human being can you said this in the beginning, 1 stands by itself, 2 can happen anywhere. But once there's 3, there you go. Once there's 3 of anything, then that's the first pattern of human being. Also, Greek, much of our language, much of our life is owed to Greek political thought as well as philosophical thought. And the Greeks had 3 types of speech, and our speech is still framed that way. So 3 is still an important point that we think of logos, we think of the philos. And so we think of the 3 parts of the speech of the Greeks. And also the number 3, again, all of the lessons that are in it. But I will give you something about the number 7. The number 7 is 3 and 4, the trivium and the quadrium. And I talk about that in the book. Now, here's something I don't think I talk about in the book. So arithmetic is the study of numbers, right? One number. It's just a number. And then what follows arithmetic is geometry, which geometry is the study of numbers in space, their distance between each other. Music is the study of numbers in time by beating time. And astronomy is the study of numbers in time and space. So they all add on to each other as you progress through them. And I think the reason that we say geometry, but geometry is the first science. Well, that's probably from Plato, from the Republic, because he does say that in another way. But, when we say science, because this is all the Age of Enlightenment, when they finally came up, or when they finally articulated the scientific method, that gave us all of everything we enjoy today that is modern, right? Cell phones, electricity, air conditioning, everything. That comes from the scientific method. Mathematics was man's first experimentation of the scientific method, because what was it? It was a There was a thought experiment that you did repeatedly throughout the day, and you proved the answer over and over again. In other words, if I want to go and I want to take 3 of these and 2 of those, I'm going to have 5 left. And every time you did it, it added up to 5. That's the scientific method. We do it over and over again in a transaction. We're proving something. We're proving something. We're proving something. And so then you take geometry, which is the first time man takes numbers and it uses his imagination. I'm not taking 2 rocks and not taking 3 rocks. I'm taking these angles, and it's all in my head. And now I'm moving things around in my imagination. So that's where I think it launches human beings into the scientific revolution. So I think that's a true statement. It's the first and noblest of the sciences because it launched us into what we have today. So I think that's part of where that is from.
And not to mention, we say that it is not only it proves the wonderful proportions of nature, but it demonstrates the more important truths of morality. And you go, why? Where did we pull that from? And you go, that comes from Plato. And you go, where did it come from, Plato? And you're like, it's within, I think it's in the Republic. And he goes, well, that was the first time that we realized truth exists, because that's the whole argument. Can we know anything to be absolutely true? And they're like, well, we know geometry is more or less very truthful. You can test it. These things will always equal the same thing. And so from Plato's perspective, he's arguing that you could find some truth within morality and various things to say, there's good things and there's bad things. And if you can distill them down to their barest form, you can find some nugget of truth. And that's the philosophical debate, right? But that was pulling from, his proof was based on it's geometric. And so with that, that's where we say, that's why you go, no matter how much you do this right angle in different ways, it's still going to be a right angle, and the math's going to still be the same. And when you look at the triangle or with 3, I always like it because we say 3 times not the charm is the charm, not 4 times, because it doesn't feel right. If we said stop, go, if we said get ready, go, it feels too short. When you say get ready, set, go, it just feels better. It feels like a completion, right? You have youth, middle age, and old age. You have beginning, middle, and end. There's just something that's complete about the triangle. And, usually it's a symbol for deity in a lot of ways, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. We love things in 3s. And so there's just something that symbolically, as humans and the way our minds work, we just like putting it in 3. If you have 2 things, it's duality. If there's 2 different arguments, there's no resolution, there's conflict. If you add a third, you have a mediator, and now it becomes functional. And so 2 is a duality, 3 is there's just something special about it.
I'll also add from a Masonic perspective, here's the important part of the 3 steps, the important part of 3 for me. This is me. And again, I tell everybody, this is my perspective, by the way. And if you disagree, great, convince me. I'm the man in the middle. I look back at who I was yesterday, and I ask myself, am I better than I was yesterday? And then I look forward to tomorrow, and I say, who am I going to be tomorrow? Who can I, And Homer Simpson actually brought this to my mind most best, because Homer Simpson was drinking vodka and mayonnaise, and Marge says, man, you're going to regret that. And he goes, well, that's tomorrow's Simpson's problem, right? But if you become the man in the middle, and this is one of the, by the way, I will every once in a while tell people stop writing letters because I hate awards. Because every time I give an award, I compete only with myself. And so they gave me Citizen of the Year about a month ago. And I said, well, I hate that because now who am I competing with? I'm competing with Citizen of the Year. I was just an average guy yesterday. So if you're the man in the, just as you say, if you pick the guy in the middle and you compete only with yourself to make yourself better tomorrow, that comes back to the concept of the temple within. What is the purpose of Freemasonry? Is self-improvement and transformational activities for us as human beings without having to do any math.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I'll leave it open.
The math is the part I get. Hey, no, it's your question now. I passed the torch on to you because.
Well, what's the question? You're killing me here.
Well, we have a classic question that we always ask, but yeah, I just got stuck going down the rabbit hole because I like talking about geometry and philosophy. And tomorrow, Raymond, I'm doing an education at Lodge on Plato's Cave. and I have a flashlight and I cardboard cutouts, and I have them shining on the wall, and I run through the importance of truth and being a seeker of light and truth, and what truth is, and how we can dispel the illusions that we create within our own minds and for ourselves. So I'm doing that tomorrow. So I'm in a philosophical mood because all I've been doing all day is listening to two things. One, Plato. Two, I've been just started reading, I was listening to an audiobook, De Architectura by Vitruvius, which is super Masonic. So I'm just in the geometry and philosophy mood as of today.
You know the lesson I got out of the cave the very first time I heard it, it really stuck with me. You know, the guy who got enlightened, when he went back in and tried to explain it, they beat the shit out of him. You know,
Yep.
I mean, so you have to be careful about that. That's Mark 22, I think. You know, you have to be careful when the blinders are removed from you, because when you start to strip away someone else's illusion in any way, they become very hateful. They become fearful, really.
Well, some people make their entire careers off of being the best shadow watchers. You know, they're paid to be the best shadow watcher. You're threatening their livelihood if you're challenging the illusion. I mean, that's the whole allegory is the risk of being someone who's a philosopher. And look at Aristotle, look at Plato, like, we see that risk is self-played, that it's hard to be the man in the room being like, you know, none of this is real, right? And they're like, all right, you need to stop talking. And you're like, okay, sorry.
Yeah, it often doesn't end well for the philosopher. That's very true.
No one likes a know-it-all. What are you going to do?
Well, you know what an expert is. An expert's somebody that knows more and more about less and less. So I don't know about know-it-all. I don't know very much. So what's your question that you want to ask? What's the final question? Your final Jeopardy. What did you have a big question?
Go for it, Matt.
You want me to? All right. It's your question now. It's supposed to be, but I'll go for it. So every time we have a past master on the show, we always ask them the same question. And that would be, what is the one piece of advice you would give to somebody who is about to take the East in their lodge? What is one thing you would tell them to help them have a good year?
You can do anything the brothers will allow you to do.
We haven't heard that.
I had a long discussion with our senior warden, and I said, "Hey, look, we have a thing called the Path to the Oriental Chair, which is it's a very long, involved document about what we do every year. It's got a calendar and it's got steps and it's got duties." And I said, and he's there. Everybody bridles against this, and I go, "Hey, look. This is the expectations. This is the first job is to do everything in here. The second job is to do everything well. The third job is then to add your personality to it, to add value with your personality. And the fourth thing then is to add something new. If you can get the first three done and you want to add something new, go ahead." Here, and this, in the beginning I said this. I will correct guys. There's a great scene in Adams, the mini series about John Adams, the president. And he's getting into a carriage on his way home after being president, or into a cart. And he gets into a cart. Somebody says, "Mr. President," and he says, "No, the president lives over there. I'm just John Adams today." And I think that the biggest thing that a master can know is that at the end of that year, they're going to call you worshipful such and such, but you're just brother such and such, and you've got to reinvent yourself. The second thing is, I didn't go through that. I didn't need to be master. This is hard to explain. There are some guys that go through, and when their master lodge is going to be the most important thing they ever did in their lives. And that's the way they're going to handle it. And generally, they end up being terrible masters because it's so important. To me, I wanted to be able to do the third degree. So being master was the burden I had to carry to be the guy who did the third degree. So I felt that being master was the burden I was going to carry for that year so I could get to do this other thing. And I realized then at coming out the other end, I wasn't a master mason. And then it dawned on me, the process, and I say this, I'm not a master mason. I mean, I have the third degree and I've been a past master, but, in a speculative mason, an operative mason, if you were a fellow crafter or journeyman, 500 years ago, and you want to be master, the master would say, well, okay, well, get a stone and give me your master's piece, right? You would give a perfect stone, and that would be your master's piece. And then I'd say to myself, well, okay, so if the temple I'm building, if the stone I'm building is me, is this my masterpiece? Is that your? Are you done? Is that your masterpiece you want to show? So if the answer is yes, then you're a master mason and good for you. I don't want to lay claim to this to be the best version of me yet. And so I'm still a fellow craft. I'm a journeyman. I'm a traveling guy on my journey. And maybe I'll become a master mason someday. But I think that there's just that humility that you've got to take out of the chair when you leave that you've got to remember. Become a guy that transforms himself rather than a guy who becomes one of those guys we don't like to see.
Wow. That was an excellent answer, and I would agree with that. I've said for a long time I'm always a fellow craft, so it's not going to get better than that because there's always something I can do better. So,
and to your point, I feel like you never know when you've done your master's piece, and you'll probably never even hear about it because the people who notice are the brothers around you. And I have a couple of brothers that I know, and I go, that's a master mason. Like with the way they act, the way they compose themselves, the things they do in their community. And in my heart and in my head, I go, that's what a master mason looks like. And you know, it sucks for that master mason. He'll probably never know because he just considers himself a fellow crafter, a journeyman. And so it's really for, you know, the other members of the craft to notice and go, that's who I want to be. That's a mentor, someone you look up to. And if you're doing that, even if you don't know it and it's subconscious, I think you're living up to the archetype of being a master without you even knowing it.
One of my grandsons asked me, he says, what kind of man should I be? And how, it was one of those conversations. My oldest one's 28, and I looked at him, I go, hey, look, I'll tell you how I've lived my life. I lived my life to be the man everybody else wants to be. Right? I walk into a room and I'm the guy that they want to be. And that makes some hard feelings. That creates some animosity. But you know what? If you all constantly live like you're going to be the guy, your life will be full. And so live like you want to be the man. And I think that's part of masonry, is to live to the fullest. So.
Love it. Love it.
Awesome. Sounds good. Brother Raymond, where can our listeners find your book and so they can pick up a copy? I'll put the Amazon in the show notes for sure. Is there any other preferred places you'd like it purchased that I could include?
Amazon, it's available there. I have a website, but it's my old consulting website that we're kind of revamping towards just to focus on my writing now. I have another book coming out Friday, I think. I'm a great technical writer. I really am. I got to give myself, I'm a pretty good technical writer. I've written this is my 8th book, and about four of them you're not going to find because I wrote them for other people. I'm a technical writer. I write reports. But I want to write fiction, right? I always wanted to write fiction. And so I've been wanted to teach myself to write fiction, so I got this idea on how I could learn to write scenes and dialogue. I took a job 10 years ago as an Uber driver, and I have produced a book. And it's called Chasing the Surge, 10,000 Rides into the American Night. And between that, in that 5 years, ending with the pandemic, I did 10,000 Uber rides. I collected those stories, and then I wrote the first version of that immediately after the pandemic started, and it was trash. It was terrible. It was 100,000 words of garbage. And I've been working on that, so that's my first kind of bridge towards fiction that will be coming out. So I'm excited to be looking at other things. But yeah, Amazon.com or Amazon, The Temple Within, Raymond Foster, you'll find it.
Yep, we'll have it in the show notes as well.
Excellent.
Well, brother, it was awesome having you on and joining us to go down the rabbit holes together, talking about masonry and your book and all that good stuff and geometry and all the good things. But to our listeners, please be sure to check out Brother Raymond's book, The Temple Within. You'll find it in the show notes, and make sure to check us out on social media. You can find us on TikTok, Facebook, etc. And yeah, and you can always email us at
timeforfellowship@gmail.com. Thank you very much for joining us, Raymond, and listeners, you have a great day.
Thank you, brothers.